Hello, everybody. After I think it's a 5 week break, Stan,
Yeah.
we have now reached the fifth academic year and the 160th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those who are just joining us, Frank and Stan, I'm Frank, that's Stan, my friend for many years. We used to meet in Manchester every few months and have a beer and chat about stuff. And then at the beginning of the first lockdown in 2020, we decided we would have these Zoom meetings. And believe it or not, they happened every week after that. And more often than not, we have a guest, but this being
Well,
the,
the drink occasional.
this being the first of the year, and actually our guest is unwell, so couldn't join us today. So best wishes to Richard Cragg, who was going to join us. But so we thought we'd just start the year with the two of us, as Richard's not available. So we do these every Friday. Today's different. It's a Saturday. It's boiling hot. England have just drawn 1-1 with the Ukraine, or not the Ukraine, but it's Ukraine, and actually schools have just started back this week. So after that little intro, hello Stan, how are you?
But it seems a bit strange. This 5 weeks seems a long
I
time
know.
not to chat. In fact, prior to us supposedly going yesterday, when I had some problems with Zoom, actually, not with Wi-Fi for once, but it was Zoom wouldn't let it work unless I updated the Zoom bit, and
Yes.
it wouldn't let me update. So it's taken me most of this afternoon to get this to work. So fingers crossed, we're all
Yeah.
right.
And also, it's good to see you're wearing your sponsor shirt. The obviously the Stan element of that.
This is Salford's anniversary shirt. So it's
How many years have they been going? Salford Rugby
100
League.
125, I think it is.
Wow, wow.
Um, but it's mainly because we're not going to get anywhere this season, I don't think. We're just outside the playoffs and got three very difficult games, and we really need to win all three
Right.
to get into the playoffs. But if you're a Salford fan, that's we're not involved in the relegation battle. That's yeah. As the season progresses, I get to the point where we can't be relegated, and I feel right.
Everything's fine.
The season's done.
Well, we keep saying, don't we, that since we started these in May 2020, we wondered whether there would be anything to talk about. Each week, we have always found plenty of things to talk about. And one of the things that we can always rely on is a mistake, an error, some catastrophe from the current government. And they have well and truly delivered this week. So, Stan, let me guess, what's caught your eye this week?
School buildings. I've been racking my brains trying to think what we can talk about.
Yeah.
Rack spelled RAAC in those circumstances. um, just how to make something which, to be fair, I'm not blaming the current Secretary of State for this, but how to make it a mess when you don't need to make it a mess. It's an object lesson in how not to lead in a crisis.
So you probably wouldn't expect to see a head teacher when facing a crisis in front of a camera, for example, on a local TV station, even, let alone a national one. Question, sort of swearing.
I've only had one session of training for working in front of a camera, and the thing they must have said to us 100 times is the camera is never off, the microphone is never off. You must always remember that.
Yeah.
I'm sure that the Secretary of State has had more than one session on handling the press and dealing with it. So how you can get to a state where you think you're off mic or off camera is just naive, to say the least.
It's interesting because is there an echo at your end, Stan, on this? I can hear it again.
No.
No, no. for me, there was it was interesting. Somebody mentioned that ITV were quite bold in releasing that clip, and that they questioned whether or not, if another prime minister had been in, leading the country, whether or not the government was viewed quite so negatively, whether they would have broadcast
Yeah.
off the record comment, but they did, and the cat's out of the bag
Well,
now.
talk about preempting it in Yes, Prime Minister, that there's a whole program based on Sir Humphrey saying how to solve unemployment off the record, off the mic.
Yeah. I think I want to give a shout out to Schools Week this week, because I mean, it's an obvious headline, but Rack and Ruin was their headline yesterday. I'm surprised I didn't see that in any of the newspapers picking up,
No, I
but
did.
I thought well done. But also for the glorious bit of alliteration that followed: Conservatives' concrete crisis causes classroom chaos. Um, there's always an educational element to all of this, isn't there? There's something for a year 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever analysis of that piece of alliteration. But I thought all credit to Schools Week for coming up with that one.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of that language, there's also that, for me, what was being said. If you take the bad language out of it, why is nobody telling me I've done a good job?
Yeah.
How many years do you have to work before somebody actually comes and says? And I'd like to say now, school leaders are doing a good job. I'm not going to put any F's in it,
Yes.
but they are.
Yeah.
Every school leader I meet are doing a good job, and I hope they get told that occasionally, but I know it won't be very often. And I think you have to be doing a good job before somebody tells you you're doing a good job.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the phrase about other people perhaps not doing very much, which she claims wasn't aimed at any of her colleagues. So,
Well, and of course, she then spun that round as if it was the head teachers who are the laggards, who
yeah.
had not returned their questionnaire. I mean, the value of that questionnaire is quite limited as well, isn't it? It's,
Well, have you seen,
like you and me are not experts on, aerated concrete.
from what I've read, though, the DfE have not collated the returns properly.
No.
So some of those schools have returned, and it's not been collated properly. So,
And that's the reason why they've decided not to name and shame, because there's probably more
yeah.
danger for them in identifying a school that has actually returned it, and they're listed as having not returned it. So, yeah,
And the other question that I saw live being ducked was the £32 million upgrade of the office,
yeah,
which the Secretary of State quite clearly said she didn't know anything about.
yeah. What, the office that she's working in?
Yeah, and she'd signed it off.
Yeah, yeah.
So just multiple disasters for things that, if you're honest and straight, you don't need to fall into traps there. I just found it incredible that, okay, it would have been easy to say, look, we really found out about this December 22. We'd had one case in 2018. We've since done a lot of work on finding out where the schools are. We thought we were in a position now where we could start a program of replacement, but some recent evidence has said we need to move faster than we thought.
I know, but
That,
well, yeah, that's one. I mean, I agree. And just a shout out that there is a school that I know that's got RAC, primary school, and I contacted the head yesterday, and she said she was really quite impressed with the support she'd received from the department and also from the local authority. So just to feel like the BBC journalist now, putting
yeah.
a positive spin on it.
I don't think, for me, it's making a crisis
Out,
out of something that
yeah.
is difficult and is high risk. But if you're honest about the way you do and what do you think, and then we had Nick Gibbs saying we're doing it faster than anybody else in the world.
World leading.
What the hell has that got to do with anything?
I mean, we're world leading at recovering from a disaster of our own making.
And Sunak's brilliant bit of spin,
Go
where
on.
they said, have you reduced it down to 50 schools a year? No,
Yeah.
no, no, that's not true. I have only in my first day in office kind of thing. I made a plan for 500 schools over 10
Yeah.
years. I think you'll find
That's 50 schools.
schools a year. And
And I
I've been
think,
looking at some of the figures, Frank. What they reckon is a third of English schools are past the
yeah.
design. So that's 7,000 schools. So at 50 a year, we'll manage those in only 140 years. We'll still be doing this, of course, at that point. And at that rate, to replace the whole range of schools, the full estate, it'll take 440 years.
Yeah.
And
Do you
we've
know,
only been in state education for just over 100 years being compulsory.
I think for me, I mean, I remember when up to 1997, like you, I started teaching in 1979. I think you started teaching then as well. Was it 1980?
7.
77. Well, I started in 79. So between 1979 and 1997 was a conservative administration of one kind or another. And during that period of time, which had lots of ups and downs economically, we got to a point in 1997 when I was leading a primary school where two classes were in porter cabins that were should have been thrown in a tip somewhere 15 or 20 years ago. And it was only after 1997 when there was a different approach and the education strategy started to impact on school buildings. And I know we've got all this building schools for, whatever, but I immediately, within a year, we had architects around looking at a 3 classroom extension on the building, a brick built, not a modular thing, these modular things.
Yeah.
And actually, for me, that was the first time when I felt as though, something was going to happen to resolve a problem that no matter how hard I tried, I'd never got anywhere close
Oh.
to resolving. And it feels like we're in a similar sort of
Yeah,
position.
I agree, Frank. I became a head in 1990, and the second governors' meeting, I took them round the building to show them where you could poke your finger through the woodwork round the windows,
Yeah.
and how, basically the whole of the windows in the whole of the building needed replacing. There was a funny situation where Lancashire sent somebody round to estimate and give a quote for it, and these two men, I'll be generous and say they were in their 70s, came and looked at it and he said, "That's too high for us to go up." And it turns out they were window glaziers and coffin makers. Apparently, it's quite a thing. But it was that idea that sort of some handymen locally could pack up, and then the same with painting, because they said, yeah, you've got some money for painting the school, we're going to contract some painters. And I said, but the wood's rotten. Well, we'll just replace where it's rotten and then paint it. So thankfully at that time I managed to get a building, was it called a building manager, my building rep anyway, who was quite good. And he said, right, what we're going to do is we're going to replace the gents' toilet window block with plastic.
Right.
So I said, I can't justify it as the only gent. I can't justify having my toilet front. And he said, no, what will happen now? Once I can do that on my day-to-day finance, once that's in, every other repair will now have to be in plastic to match.
Oh, right, right.
And within 18 months, the whole of the school was done in UPVC. It was fantastic.
Yeah,
What a difference that made.
I know.
And it's right, Frank, what you say. It's that Sunday is taking interest in
Yeah,
the school and investing a lot of money in the school,
yeah.
and it lifts the morale in the school.
I agree. I
It,
agree. I mean, it's funny because children have started back this term, this week, and I've started to do sort of primary runs and secondary runs for the grandchildren, and I had I had a reason to go to the secondary school for our eldest granddaughter, and so I walked in because she'd left some PE kit in my car. And I sort of walked down there thinking, oh God, this is going to be really tough. I'm going to get, I don't know how I'm going to be treated. I have to say, I walked in and I was as well treated by that receptionist who was sympathetic and wanted to help. And there was a real sort of sense of purpose and energy in the school. You could feel it. I was really, really impressed. So we witter and whine and moan sometimes, or quite a lot. But as you say, there are some stunning head teachers out there and some stunning schools, still doing it, still churning out really good young people.
But I think there are people who sort of want to help and want to show you that they want to help, and if you can find one of those and get them in reception, that makes a
Yeah.
difference.
Well, perhaps we ought to have a receptionist on because when we've done
Although I have a
inspections.
friend who would say, I need somebody who's also a Rottweiler. If you're in a disadvantaged area, you've got to
Yeah.
really work with the parents. You need somebody not only that they respect, but they are scared of.
I know. Well, there was somebody. My daughter has moved from this school into a school. Sorry, and there's a non-teaching member of staff there who works in the office. But when the children are roaming around, at break time and whatever, she sits on a chair because she's slightly disabled, and basically anybody walks past the office, she checks whether they've got their reading book with them.
Right, excellent.
She really adds value to that school. And that's something over and above what she's meant to do, but she clearly understands the importance of that. And it's people like that I continue to sort of be impressed with. I suppose in a sense when I was a head, I was always very concerned about how the kitchen staff were feeling, how the cleaners were feeling, how the caretaker was feeling. All of those staff were crucially important, and needed to contribute their bit, to the well-being of everybody. But it was heartening this week actually going in and seeing what was a really good school, one judged actually outstanding by Ofsted, as really looking as though it was.
Well,
Uh,
I sort of one step back experience as my grandson, who's only one, started nursery.
oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, 2 days, and but what got me was the communication, because my wife's going to be somebody officially who can pick him up with a
Yes.
password and everything else. She gets an email daily about what's going on, but on his 2 days so far, there's been a breakdown of what activities they've done, what food he's eaten, when he's eaten it, nappy changes, times, and the photographs of him doing various, and that's come as an email twice during the day.
Wow.
And I just think, and I know it's a small nursery, but that kind of communication is
Yeah,
just fantastic.
it's phenomenal, is it?
You remember the days, you'll know, of reception children coming in and still screaming when the parents went away. The parents spent the day panicking. Imagine if, as I'm sure they can do now, you can WhatsApp them 10 minutes afterwards with
I
the child
know. I
involved in
know.
the group, and then you can just say you can relax now.
Yeah.
Quite.
I mean, I was talking to my. We are wandering here, aren't we? Because I've still got a couple of things I want to
Yeah.
cover. But I was talking to my son-in-law, who is an assistant head teacher in a primary school, and this afternoon actually, and just he in his role, he will now read reports rather than write them. He'll
Right.
sign them off. And so I just said to how much time were you taking over your reports, to get them ready for signing off as a teacher? So he said, well, probably about 2 or 3 days. And it just made me think, as you were saying there, about really effective report writing or assessment sharing is this ongoing assessment, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't then need the final report. And when you think about how much time, how helpful it is and how reassuring it is for parents and carers to know on a regular basis, not big stuff, but just little stuff that says they're doing really well, had a great
Yeah.
day, you know, that sort of stuff. Even as a year 10,
Yeah.
even year 11, you know, I mean, that's rather than teachers having to sit down and write, you know, hours and hours and hours of stuff in order to comply with a end of year report requirement.
Well, I know it's off the top of there, but I remember my daughter at sixth form. My son had an interesting time, let's say, at sixth form.
Yeah,
I'd
I
had,
can say the same.
I'd had a few conversations with them there, culminating in the I think it was the deputy saying, You'd be surprised how many problems we have with students." And I said, "No, I wouldn't be surprised at all." When my daughter went to a different sixth form, a newly appointed head there said, and these students are 16 up to 18. They're responsible for their own lives. They don't need their parents being told what's going on, blah, blah, blah. Said, I don't believe that, and I never have. So if there's anything you need to know, you'll hear it directly from me. And I thought that was brilliant.
um, well, I'm just conscious of what's caught my eye. Martyn Oliver, Sir Martyn Oliver, was in front of the select committee this week, and he was appointed, or they recommended on a majority vote, I think it was 4-1, that he should be appointed as the chief inspector. And I think what you were saying before was that he came over quite well, competent, but some things sort of stuck in my throat a little bit. And one of them was around the fact that he was encouraging senior leaders to be inspectors, and that was something that I was a big advocate of when I was working for the inspectorate, and led on some of those early programs where we were turning HMI into inspectors, as well as you and I had a year on secondment in the mid-90s, which is why we got to know each other, seconded to Ofsted. But the thing is that what really surprised me was that he has never inspected. So in effect, what he's asking is for every other senior leader, apart from him, to inspect.
Yeah.
But actually,
No,
he's not
I,
inspected ever.
I assumed he would have done.
Yeah, and for me, the question is that, you know, going back, reviewing those people who have undertaken the chief inspector role, and it's not a requirement that you have inspected yourself, but in my experience of inspection, the chief inspector who has inspected has tended to be the stronger chief inspector, because it's a very simple view to take that actually all you've got to do is put some of these head teachers on a training program for 6 weeks, and then they can start leading inspections. But you and I had a year. We were monitored for an entire year with, you know, 3 other colleagues by a future chief inspector who was, talking about Rottweilers, she was a Rottweiler, and she drove us really hard to the point that we really did understand the complexity and the dangers of inspection for schools and for for inspectors. So I think that idea that, yeah, okay, what you decided that it wasn't, you didn't want to get involved in inspection because you were too busy trying to improve and turn around the schools. Now that you're chief inspector, it's all right for everybody else not to concentrate on their schools and to give a bit more time to Ofsted. You know, I mean, it doesn't really, that doesn't impress me at all. And one final thing is that he said that he had low, the trust that he leads, he still leads it, has low, I think he said suspension, I think it might have been suspension or exclusion for the area. And you know, some of the work that I've been doing in not just for myself but for other organizations, you know, that we are not finding that evidence in the data. And so in a way, you know, it is deeply disappointing when you see statements made like that, which I don't think actually hold up. And
Mm,
the final thing I'd say is that having read and trawled through every single secondary trust inspection report, there are just countless occasions where it talks about poor behaviour and exclusion rates are too high. And that is in schools where the school has been with the trust, not a couple of terms, a couple of years. Some of those are over 10 years.
mm,
Now, for me, the idea is that, yeah, I understand that there may need to be a new broom, but that new broom can't be sweeping kids out 10 years later because you've got to ask yourself, something wrong with the broom.
yeah. I mean, I think some time ago when I and it is long enough ago to say this might well have changed. Looking at systems that were employed, there was no escape mechanism. Everything sort of stepped up. If you were
Yes.
forgotten your pencil, if you'd done this, and
It,
and at
it's
no point was the right. Well, it's been 6 months since the last time you.
there's a release valve.
Yeah,
Yes.
and there wasn't any of that. And plus, there was instant suspension for things that, yes, they are, you know, more serious things, setting a fire alarm off or something. But there was no suggestion that anybody would look into why or how
Mm,
or what the background was. And at the time, I was a little bit worried about that. But what caught my eye in what he was saying, I only watched about 30 minutes or so of it, was he started to talk about the need to look at context and to see schools as individual schools, which, for me, I raised the flag. But then I noticed, because I think the response of the people who were interviewing, that looked a little bit like a red rag.
yes.
He sort of backpedaled on that and then said, well, it'll be something that we'll need to look at and find the evidence, etc. He also, I don't think, got to the grips with the one word judgment, did he? But he,
No.
he
No.
did say he would look at it, or it was
But
something to
but
look at.
isn't that really something that if you've been inspecting and you know the difficulties in actually bringing that single word judgment, which actually is delivered through a framework, a handbook, a training, all of this sort of stuff. If you really understood that, then actually your contribution to the decision as to whether or not the
Yeah,
single word judgment should go or not is actually, I think, more convincing
mm.
to the profession.
Yeah. I still think there's an easy option where you look at the way we report expected. um, It'd be easy to say, well,
Yeah.
not easy, but to say this school meets the expected standards
And
of
yeah.
schools in England,
Yes.
and then break down the 5 key areas, and give them a grading. So you're either meeting the expectation or meeting the standard, or you're not.
Yeah.
Be very few schools. We're almost there now, because I notice now we don't talk about outstanding and good and not good. We
Yes.
talk about outstanding and good in one block.
Yeah.
I suspect that's political, because if you just look at outstanding schools, clearly the numbers have plummeted,
Yes. Yeah.
and that wouldn't look good politically. But there are more outstanding and good if you group them together. Well, if you're grouping them together, just have the one.
Yeah. One. Yeah. It meets the
Is
standard.
meets the standard.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the government continue to promote the idea that when Labour uh, lost the election in 2010, then there was somewhere close on 70% of schools were good or better, and now it's up in the 90%, high 80s, as if to say, what, if the framework had stayed the same.
Yeah. And if the word
I've
satisfactory was still used,
used, and it is quite remarkable. You may want to say that actually this is just brilliant leadership, brilliant teachers, brilliant teaching staff, that during a period of severe austerity, during a COVID pandemic, during a period where school buildings have not seen any form of investment, where recruitment crisis has never been worse, we suddenly have got from a position where there are 20% more better schools than there was then. The framework is not the same framework.
Now, and of course, you'd expect with 20% better schools, 20% rise in
And
the in standards.
it's obvious, Stan. It's a, it just, if this was a sort of a crime scene, you'd be thinking, this doesn't add up.
No, it doesn't.
This doesn't add up. What I want to do, I've got about, because we've done 30 odd minutes, is do you mind if I just sort of have a issue
Well,
around?
you let me mention
I know,
Salford at the end.
but
So
it's
go on.
another S. But I mean, I grew up in Essex and went to a secondary school in Southend. So my early days of watching football were at Southend United. And for the last sort of 4 or 5, well, probably last 15 years, the club has not been very well managed and led. And on the 4th of October, there is the final High Court hearing as to whether or not the football club that I've supported my entire life will actually fold unless someone can find £250,000 to pay the taxman. So I believe something like £600,000 to pay the other clubs who have got these sort of when they sell a player and they're then sold on, there's generally a payment made to the original club. Well, Southend haven't paid that. But one thing that's really struck me is that last year, towards the end of the year, none of the players were paid. None of the office staff had been paid. And it was only earlier this year when they managed to find some money to keep the HMRC off their backs and they paid the players. But there were still months where office staff had not been paid. And during that period of time, at the end of last season, Southend missed out on a playoff place by one, I think it's 1 point. And this year they've had 10 points docked because they haven't paid all their tax bills. But what is remarkable is that, and we talk about leadership a lot here, is the leadership of that manager who has managed to keep that club rolling, keep the club moving, who is so deeply respected by his players and by the fans that actually, even though he could go somewhere else, I'm sure he would easily get a job, so in a much higher league. He has stayed, and a lot of the players who could earn a lot more money have also stayed, even though the future is not bright, it's not clear. And I just think that that says a lot about the culture in that team, the culture in that club, and that sense of doing it for the fans and doing it for each other is, I think, what a lot of teachers do. And the
Yeah, I
reason
was
why
just
they
going to
don't
say,
move on, yeah, they
yeah.
become sort of connected to their community, they're connected to the families. They could easily perhaps get an easier job working in a,
Mm.
more affluent area somewhere, but they don't, they just stick at it because they know that they're needed.
I, I I don't do that much inset anymore, but part of when I used to talk to school leaders, it was about being a steward. Rather, stop thinking of yourself as a head teacher and think of yourself as a steward for this school in this community, and you're managing it for a period of time, and then you pass it on. And in your mind must be, I need to pass it on in a better state than I inherited it. And if every steward of that school does that, the school will continue to improve and get better, etc. But I think we've got to a point now where, in some cases, school leaders think they own the school.
Yeah.
It's their school, and I think they're forgetting that they're actually there for a short time in the history of the school, to just make sure what they do is the right thing and they pass it on in a better condition than it was. I don't mean the building, although that can
that,
help.
that would be a good thing. But actually, yeah, it's right because it's like when I was the CEO of the co-op, I made clear that I could not have a vote. I was the highest paid member of staff in the trust, but actually I delivered the trust board's
Yeah.
strategic plan. It wasn't my plan. I helped them, I influenced it, but I didn't approve it. And I think that you're right. There are some still who, I know that it's difficult for CEOs now to be voting members of the or trustees. But actually, I think that there's still something in the veins of some trusts, in the veins of some governing bodies, where the head teacher probably rules the roost perhaps a little bit too much. But yeah,
Yeah, and the fact that some head teachers can then decide, well, we're going to become, and it gives them even more
but yeah,
ownership, if you like, for a
yeah.
long period of time. And I know there are examples around the country where people have made it a family affair, and the family will inherit, if you like, the
Well,
trust.
I know. I mean, those are some of the worst examples, aren't there? I mean, but
Yeah,
actually, there are many others, very honourable, highly, respectable, genuine, transparent type of trust where that sort of thing doesn't happen. But it only requires one high profile such trust for that to sort of give you a sense that things might be a bit rotten further down the
yeah.
line. Um,
I just think that if you are genuine about what you're doing for the community, for the children, for the staff, for the people that rely on you, you shouldn't be seeing it as some sort of fiefdom that
no,
gives you the opportunity to make money out of it, or to make yourself better.
yes.
I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too old for this now.
Don't start talking like that, Stan. I mean, right. Well, I'm just looking at that. It's about 35 minutes. So that's the end of the 160th edition. Next week, we have a former HMI and somebody who, when I was ahead, visited the school as part of the curriculum award. I don't know if you remember
Oh
that.
yeah,
Um,
oh yeah.
and so he assessed the suitability of the school that I led. But we've never spoken about that, even though he and I know. So we might find out more. Well, no doubt you would
Wonder
be
if he's
doing
got
the
his any early drafts of that. It'd be nice for him to
digging.
take along.
But he was an HMI for a very long time and has only recently stood down. So be interesting to see where we go with that. But the other thing is, before we finish, is that we've got another spotlight discussion coming up, and I can't reveal too much about it, but we have been approached by, or we approached, and this gentleman was very happy to come along. A very high profile school inspection where there was a lot of turbulence, a lot of unhappiness, and this governor is wanting to chat to us about how that felt for him as a governor. So we're not getting into the business of what happened, but it's actually the emotional elements of it and how it affected the community. So we have a spotlight coming up with that. So I'm really quite excited about
Yeah,
that discussion. So anyway, next week we're back as usual, and thank you very much, Stan, for joining us again.
thank you.
And
I
it's
did thank you on Twitter, didn't I?
You
For
did. I thought that was one of the nicest things you've said. I don't know if you want to repeat it now, Stan.
I think I may have been drunk.
Uh,
No,
okay.
I will say it now, because while we're in the spirit of telling anybody if they've done a flipping good job,
Uh,
that Frank, you do put so much effort into getting this from what it was. Let's put the world to rights over a pint of beer, to something that's for some people interesting to listen to, and the quality of guests that you managed to get is a lot of hard work. So I do appreciate it.
well, I do know. Just Sir David Carter's coming back this term.
All right, good.
We got Professor Hargreaves joining us again with it.
Maybe
Have you got his new book? I have. Here it is. There we go.
I bet you haven't got a shelf space
the
just
Hargreaves, the
books.
Hargreaves style. But yeah, so we've got him and a number of great guests coming up. So Really looking forward to this term. And actually, thank you for the kind words, Stan. But to be honest, it's cathartic, isn't it?
It is.
It is
It
cathartic.
is.
We get so much from it. It's like
Yeah.
it's like even when it's just us two, there is a little bit of just reconsidering whether my position was right. You're quietly or gently testing me. So it's good fun. So thank you. Okay, till next week. Take care, everybody. Bye
All
bye.
right.